Number 3. Colin's Lucky Madon. In 1999, 21-year-old Flora Malo was a student with aspirations. She was studying at Technikon Northern Gauteng in South Africa. She lived in a building with other students in Soshanguve. She was a happy person who was good friends with her next-door neighbor. On March 3, 1999, she was at home with her boyfriend, Colin's Lucky Madon. Collins was known to be an emotional person with a short temper. That night, neighbors heard screaming coming from her apartment. The tenant next door said it sounded like Flora was being assaulted. Then, it sounded like Flora was being choked. The neighbors did not call the police because they thought that the couple was just having a regular argument, so they weren't too concerned. The next day, Collins told the neighbors that Flora was in Johannesburg visiting a family member in the hopes of borrowing money from them. The neighbor asked about the screams, but Collins didn't answer her. Neighbors decided to check Flora's room, and they noted it was disorderly. There were blankets off the bed, and laundry was piled up in the corner. They thought that this was weird because Flora was normally a very tidy person. They smelled something bad, and Collins said that some meat had gone bad. He told other people that Flora had left a hot plate turned on in the room, and that's why it smelled bad. Nevertheless, someone reported Collins to the police. He was brought in for questioning, but he was released shortly afterward. A year later, Collins Madon was in prison, serving a 12-year sentence for attempted murder in a different case. In a different prison, Collins told his younger sister, Cynthia Maziza, that he killed Flora. He also said he couldn't sleep because Flora's spirit was haunting him. He said that Flora's spirit would appear and even have sex with him. He then told Cynthia that he strangled Flora and kept her body in their room for 3 days. Then he rolled her body onto a mat, bought some gas, brought her body to a field, and then he set the body on fire. When the fire burnt out, he cut the body in half and threw the bottom half of her body in a nearby drain. He buried the top half of her body. Cynthia asked Collins why he didn't tell anyone else, and he said because there was no evidence that he had killed her. Collins told Cynthia that Flora's spirit compelled him to confess to her. Cynthia told their parents about Collins' confession, but they didn't believe he murdered Flora. By 2019, Collins was out of prison. He got into a fight with Cynthia's daughter, and he threatened to kill her. Cynthia reported the incident to the police. She also called her friend Nancy for help. Nancy was a police officer. When Cynthia called Nancy, Nancy was off duty, but she still met up with Cynthia and Collins. Collins said he had something to tell them. He then asked them to shut off their phones, but Cynthia didn't. Instead, she turned on a recording app. Collins then confessed to murdering Flora and even showed them where he disposed of her body. He said he wanted to tell them because Flora's spirit was still haunting him. He also insisted that he needed to talk to Flora's mother. The next day, Collins confessed to Flora's mother, and again, Cynthia recorded the conversation. Cynthia gave the recordings to the police, and Collins was arrested. He went to trial in February 2021. Court documents say it seems like the haunting of Flora's spirit drove Collins to confess. 52-year-old Collins Lucky Madon was sentenced to life in prison in March 2021 for the murder of Flora Malo. It's unclear where he's serving his sentence. For about 20 years, Flora's family didn't know what had happened to her. Even now that they know, her family can't pay their proper respects because Flora's remains have never been found. Number 2. Mark Bridger. Machynlleth is a small market town in Wales. It was home to 5-year-old April Jones and her family. April was born 7 weeks premature. During her first few weeks of life, there were complications with her health. So she had cerebral palsy on the lower left side of her body. But she didn't let this limit her. April loved her pink bicycle, and she rode it everywhere. On October 1st, 2012, at about 7:15 p.m., April was out playing with her friends. The last time April's parents saw her, she was riding her bike. About 20 minutes later, April's mother, Coral, went out to bring her home. But she couldn't find April. Coral immediately called 999, which is the emergency line in Great Britain. Officers were in the area in minutes. One girl said that she saw April talking to a man, and then she got into his grey van. One notable thing that the girl said was that April got into the right side of the car. This is unusual because in most vehicles in the United Kingdom, the driver's side is on the right-hand side. She also described the man by saying he had brown hair, a beard, and blue or green eyes. He was wearing a green jacket or a jumper, jeans, and running shoes. Massive searches were conducted for April. The next morning, a police helicopter was searching the area close to where April was kidnapped, and they noticed a man calmly walking his dog. The police thought that this was odd because the rest of the townspeople were looking for April. They thought it was strange that the man didn't even look up at the helicopter. So police officers on the ground approached him and learned that he was 46-year-old Mark Bridger. Bridger was already on the police's radar because several people reported seeing his vehicle, a gray Land Rover Discovery with a steering wheel on the left-hand side, in the area where April was kidnapped. He also matched the description of the kidnapper. One thing the police noted was that he usually had a beard, but it was clear he had recently shaved. Bridger has 6 children with 4 women. He has a criminal record dating back to when he was 19. He had been convicted of possession of a firearm, theft, and attempted car theft, amongst other charges. He had several charges stemming from his drinking. He apparently had a short temper when he drank, and he lashed out at several romantic partners. One time he was involved in a violent road rage incident. However, he had no charges related to children or any sex crimes. Bridger had worked with the fire brigade. He had also worked in a slaughterhouse and in the forestry industry. Bridger lived close to where the helicopter spotted him. The helicopter flew over his home, and the pilot saw smoke coming out of the chimney. When the police officer approached Bridger on the road, Bridger said, "I know what this is about." The officer then asked where April was. Bridger replied, "It was an accident. I crushed her with a car. I don't know where she is." Bridger was then arrested and put in the back of the police car. On the way to the police station, Bridger kept talking. He claimed he had been drinking heavily and he hit April with his Land Rover. He panicked and put her body into his vehicle, but he doesn't remember what he did with her body. He said he was so drunk that he didn't even realize he had killed April until the next morning when he saw the news reports. After Bridger was arrested, the police searched his home. There was a fire burning in the fireplace. The officers found that the fire made it uncomfortably warm in the house. The officers also noticed the strong odor of cleaning chemicals. In Bridger's home, they found some knives that had been sterilized. There was a boning knife with a burned blade. In the fireplace, the police found 16 bone fragments. Another bone fragment was found in the drain of the bathtub. However, DNA testing could not be done on the fragments. But some blood was found in the home, and DNA testing was performed on it. It turned out to be April's blood. The police looked at Bridger's computer and discovered in the hours leading up to the murder, he had been looking at child pornography on his computer. The police believe that Bridger watched this and it encouraged him to kidnap a child. He apparently approached 3 other girls that night before convincing April to get into his car. So the police do not believe that April was targeted, but she was just the person who got into Bridger's car. For 7 months, the searches for April's remains continued. They ended in the month of April without finding anything. The police developed a theory as to what happened to April. They believe she was brought back to Bridger's home where she was sexually assaulted. They think that Bridger most likely smothered her to death. Then, using his experience from the time at the slaughterhouse, he dismembered the body. Although bone fragments were found in the fireplace, the police do not think that Bridger burned her body to dispose of it. Instead, they think he used his knowledge from his work in the forestry industry to hide the body. Mark Bridger went to trial in April 2013. The trial lasted 4.5 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Bridger was found guilty. He was given life imprisonment with a whole life order, which is equivalent to life without parole. In 2015, it was revealed that Bridger believes he is haunted by a ghost that he thinks is April Jones. He told another inmate that the 5-year-old's ghost visits him at night. Her ghost is brought into his cell by an older spirit. The other inmate said that Bridger was visibly upset by the ghostly visits. April's mother, Carl, said that she hopes April's ghost torments Bridger for the rest of his life and gives him hell. April Jones' remains have never been found. Mark Bridger maintains her death was an accident and there was no sexual assault. Unless something drastic happens to his sentence, Bridger will die in prison. April's family is hoping he will reveal the location of her remains. Perhaps April's ghost will convince him to give up the location of her remains. Number 1. Terry Childs. In 1979, Linda Ann Josevic was a student at De Anza College in Cupertino, California. She was interested in athletics. She also worked as a sales clerk at Mervyn's department store in Santa Clara, California. On November 7, 1979, Josevic told her coworker that she was going to her car in the parking lot to get some change. She wanted to use a payphone to call a friend about going to a movie. She never returned from her break. Hundreds of people searched for her. Josevic's ransacked car was found a few days later. Although no body had been found, the investigators thought that Josevic had been murdered. But they exhausted all their leads and they didn't know who did it or what happened. So the case went cold. It stayed that way for 16 years. Then, in 1995, a man was foraging for mushrooms in the Santa Cruz Mountains. He came across human ribs and a jawbone. They belonged to Linda Ann Josevic. 9 years later, in 2004, her skull and upper jaw were found not far from the other remains. But Josevic's family would have to wait 3 more years to find out what happened to her. In 2007, 28 years after Linda Ann Josevic went missing, 52-year-old Cherry Childs was serving time in prison for murder at the Salinas Valley State Prison. Out of the blue, Childs confessed to murdering Linda Ann Josevic. He said that Josevic's spirit haunted him in his prison cell. He said she would just stare at him. He told detectives that her death was eating up his brain and he had to confess to free himself of his demons. Childs explained on the night he killed Josevic, he got into a fight with his mother and was angry, so he left home. He came across Josevic in the parking lot of her work at around 7 p.m. He shoved her into her car, beat her, and drove her to the mountains, where he strangled and stabbed her. A few days later, he returned to her body and covered it with leaves. Finally, after almost 3 decades, the Josevic family knew who was responsible for her murder. Childs said that after he confessed, Josevic's spirit stopped haunting him. When Childs confessed to killing Linda Ann Josevic, he was serving time for the murders of 32-year-old Rulon McGill and 17-year-old Janine Singala, who was also known as Lois Singala. In 1979, Rulon McGill was a teacher in Winnemucca, Nevada. She was married and had a 3-year-old daughter. On July 10th, she went to Reno for a dentist appointment and to do some shopping. She never returned home. 2 days later, her body was found in a drainage ditch. She was nude and she had been sexually assaulted. She had been stabbed to death. Her murder remained unsolved until Terry Childs confessed to killing her in 1997. He said that he came across McGill and it looked like she had money, so he followed her to her car. He knocked her down and held her at knife point. Then he ordered her to get into the car and drive with him in the passenger seat. Childs said that he was using methamphetamine and PCP at the time. He raped her and stabbed her to death. He said he killed McGill so she wouldn't identify him. Childs was charged with McGill's murder and he pleaded guilty in June 1998. He was sentenced to life in prison. When Childs confessed to McGill's murder, he was already serving a 41-year sentence for murdering Janine Singala. On August 5, 1987, Childs brought Janine Singala to a hillside in Scotts Valley, California. Childs said he had been awake and on drugs for several days. He shot Singala 15 times in the arm, stomach, back, thigh, and head. Childs said that he killed Singala because she knew he stole cocaine a month earlier and he was afraid she was a police informant. Singala had lived on and off with people, including Childs. Childs' girlfriend, Melanie Lee Hereford, was there when Childs murdered Singala. Childs threatened to kill Hereford and her niece if she went to the police, so she didn't. The police ended up arresting Childs and Hereford on an unrelated charge for possessing an explosive device while they were investigating her killing. Later, they were charged in connection with Singala's murder. Hereford accepted a plea deal, and she was charged with being an accessory to murder in exchange for testifying against Childs in court. The trial began in January 1987. Hereford said she was still haunted by Singala's screams. A month later, Childs was found guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 41 years in prison. Of course, at the time, the authorities had no idea that they were locking up a serial killer. He may have also killed many more people than the 3 we mentioned. In 1997, Childs told the police he could clear up 6 murders in California, 2 in Tennessee, and 2 in Seattle, Washington. Childs wanted a plea deal. If he confessed to more murders, he wanted to avoid the death penalty, and he wanted to be shipped out of California. Prosecutors refused the deal. Nevertheless, in 2017, Childs pleaded guilty to 2 murders he said he could clear up. On October 11, 1984, the body of 28-year-old Joan Mack was found on Beer Can Beach in Aptos, an unincorporated town in Santa Cruz County, California. She had been bound, gagged, and stabbed to death. On February 3, 1985, Christopher Hall was shot to death in San Lorenzo Park in Southern California. For the 2 murders, Childs was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms in prison without the chance of parole. The police said that Childs may have killed at least 25 people. 66-year-old Terry Childs is currently incarcerated at the California State Prison. He will likely die before he gets out. Number 3. Christopher Case. In April 1991, life was good for Christopher Case. The 35-year-old managed artist at a music company in Seattle, Washington. He was successful at work, had good friends, and didn't have any known enemies. But things took a bizarre turn after Case visited San Francisco. On April 11th, Case visited the California city on business. He met a woman who shared his love of ancient music. They had dinner together. At some point during the night, the woman tried to seduce Case, but he wasn't interested. The woman told Case that she was a witch and would curse him. She said, "You'll be sorry and most likely be dead within a week." Case thought nothing of what the woman said and returned home to Seattle. That's when weird things started happening. Case heard whispers, saw shadows, and woke up in the night feeling like hands were choking him. He even woke up with cuts and blood on his hands. Case thought that the witch was attacking him in his sleep. On April 14th, Case told friends that he was worried that the curse was real. Sammy Souter was one of the friends Case spoke with. Souter was a psychic and a teacher. Case left her a message saying, "They're after me. I'm very, very afraid. Extremely afraid. I could die from this." They had been friends for about a decade. Souter knew Case to be healthy, stable, and someone who didn't believe in witchcraft. She told Case to get help. Case went to a bookstore looking for advice on witchcraft. A few days later, Souter hadn't heard from Case and she was worried. She called the police, asking for a welfare check. Police officers visited Case's apartment a couple times, but there was no response. The door was locked and they couldn't get into the apartment. It's unclear what day they visited. What is known is that the police visited Case's apartment at some point on April 18th. This time, his door was unlocked. Police found Case's dead body in the bathtub. He was wearing his clothes and there was no water in the bathtub. Allegedly, police found Case in a prayer position. There were no signs of violence, foul play, or robbery. The police found 10 candles that had nearly been totally burned. They also found several crucifixes. There were several piles of kosher salt along the base of the walls throughout his apartment. There were also piles of salt in the corners of the walls and on the porch. Piles of salt are usually part of rituals to ward off evil forces. The police found letters Case had written. They contained similar things to what Case had told his friends, that a witch cursed him and he was experiencing strange things in his apartment. An autopsy showed that Case died of myocarditis, which is an inflammation of the heart muscle. It caused Case's heart to stop beating. Exactly what caused the myocarditis remains a mystery, but it's apparent that Christopher Case really believed that he was cursed by a witch. Number 2. The Jake Bird Hex. Tacoma, Washington is about 35 miles south of Seattle. In 1947, the population of the city was around 140,000. 52-year-old Bertha Clutt lived there with her 17-year-old daughter, Beverly June Clutt. Beverly had just graduated from high school. Bertha was a baker. Bertha's husband, Edward, had died 7 years earlier. On October 29, 1947, Beverly came home from a prayer meeting at about 10 p.m. At around 2:30 a.m., neighbors heard screams coming from the Clutt house. They called the police. When they drove up, they saw a man walking out of the Clutt's home. He was holding a knife and his shoes. He ran away and dropped a purse. The police chased him through an alley. Two officers caught up to him, and the man stabbed them both. Eventually, the police caught the man and arrested him. They noticed that he had blood and brain tissue on his pants. The police went to the home of Bertha and Beverly. They found Beverly's body between the doorway of the kitchen and the dining room. She was lying on her face in a pool of blood. Police found an axe on the kitchen floor. They found Bertha's body in her bedroom, which was adjacent to the kitchen. Her body was so bloody they couldn't see most of her wounds. Her head was nearly severed. Based on the position of her body, the police believe she was sexually assaulted and then murdered. The man the police arrested was identified as 45-year-old Jake Bird. Before he left the scene, the police asked Bird what had happened. Bird said that he didn't commit the murders. Instead, he said his friend Leroy murdered Bertha and Beverly. The police didn't believe Bird, and he was brought to jail. Bird eventually confessed to the murders of Bertha and Beverly Clutt. Bird said he only intended on robbing them. Before he entered their home, he grabbed an axe from their shed. He took off his shoes so he could sneak into their house quietly. He entered their house through an unlocked back door. He snuck into Bertha's bedroom while she was sleeping and stole her purse. But she woke up and tried to stop him. Bird said he tried to rape her. Bertha put up a fight and he panicked, so he hit her in the head with an axe. Bertha screamed. Bird then struck Bertha several more times with the axe. Beverly ran from the upstairs bedroom to the kitchen and Bird attacked her with the axe. She died in the doorway of the kitchen. Bertha and Beverly each had 16 cuts or lacerations. He then dropped the axe, left the home, and ran from the police. He had a knife on him, which he used to stab the two police officers. Bird was charged with first-degree murder for the killing of Bertha Clutt. If he wasn't convicted of Bertha's murder, he would have been charged with Beverly Clutt's murder. Bird's trial started on November 24th and it lasted 3 days. He had pleaded not guilty. The jury found Bird guilty of first-degree murder. Bird then confessed that he was involved in many other murders. He said he could clear up 44 murders from across the country. He wanted to share this information with the investigators in exchange for a life sentence instead of being executed. The district attorney didn't agree to give him a life sentence, but they did agree to delay his sentencing hearing to hear what Bird had to say. Bird then confessed to dozens of murders. The police were able to confirm 11 of the murders, but it's unclear exactly who all the victims were. What is known is that he committed 3 murders in Omaha, Nebraska in November 1928, 3 in South Bend, Indiana in September 1942, 1 in Ogden, Utah on October 3, 1947, 1 in Highland Park, Illinois on June 24, 1942, and Bertha and Beverly Clutt. Bird killed many of his victims with an axe. While the police were investigating Bird's confessions, he appealed his conviction because he wanted a new trial. His request was denied. At Bird's sentencing hearing in December 1947, Judge E.D. Hodge sentenced Bird to death. He then asked Bird for a comment. Bird said that the people who had anything to do with his case would die before him. This became known as the Jake Bird Hex. 1 month after his sentencing, Judge Hodge died of a heart attack. He was in excellent health up to his death. In January 1948, Under-Sheriff Joe Karpak interrogated Bird about some unsolved murders. In April 1948, he died of a heart attack. In January 1948, the court clerk, Ray Scott, also died of a heart attack. He hadn't missed a day of work because of illness in the 5 years he worked as a court clerk. On September 28, 1948, Detective Lyons died of a heart attack too. James W. Selden, Bird's attorney, had asked to be taken off Bird's case, but he was ordered to finish the trial. Selden made it known that he was only defending Bird because he had to. He died of a heart attack in November 1948. Arthur A. Stoddard was a correctional officer who retired shortly after Bird's sentencing. He died on April 27, 1949. It's unknown how he died, but some people say it was from a heart attack. 47-year-old Jake Bird was hanged on July 15, 1949. There was one more tragedy seemingly connected to the hex after Bird's execution. 5 months after he was executed, 47-year-old Helen Osborne was found dead in a cabin in rural Minnesota. She had been hacked to death with a hatchet. Her husband, 58-year-old Lloyd Osborne, was found dead, sitting behind a desk in the same room. On the desk was a handwritten note. Lloyd wrote he had a nightmare about Jake Bird and he didn't realize what he had done to Helen. He decided that killing himself was the easy way out. If there was a connection between Bird and the Osbornes besides Lloyd's dream, it has never been made public. Their death seemed to be the end of the Jake Bird hex. Number 1. Cursed Power Rangers. The Mighty Morphin Power Rangers first aired in the United States in 1993. It's a live-action series that follows 5 teenagers in the fictional city of Angel Grove. The teens transform into superheroes and fight villains like Rita Repulsa, a space witch. From there, it's expanded into a huge franchise that has 28 seasons of 21 variations of the show and 3 major motion pictures. Unfortunately, it turns out that some of the actors playing the superheroes of the shows were really villains themselves. A few of the actors have been involved in deaths, murders, and violence. The horrible trend is called the Power Rangers Curse. First, here are some of the tragic deaths. Tui Trang was part of the original cast that played the Yellow Ranger. On September 3, 2001, she was riding in a car in California. Someone else was driving. The car swerved off the road and hit a rock face. Sadly, Trang did not survive. She was just 27 years old. Bob Papenbrook was a voice actor on many of the Power Rangers seasons. He died of lung cancer at the age of 50 on March 17, 2006. Machiko Soga was a voice actor and played several roles in the series, including Rita Repulsa. Soga died of pancreatic cancer on May 7, 2006. She was 68 years old. Edward Lawrence Albert played Mr. Collins in Power Rangers Time Force. That was the 9th season of the Power Rangers, which aired in 2001. On September 22, 2006, Albert died of lung cancer. He was 55 years old. Heather Rutter played the White Mystic Ranger in Power Rangers Mystic Force. That was the 14th season in 2006. She received a diagnosis of a brain tumor in 2010. Sadly, she died just 2 weeks later on July 20th, 2010. She was 55 years old. Robert L. Manahan voiced the character Zordon in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. The 43-year-old died from a heart aneurysm on June 30th, 2000. Richard Janelli played Ernie in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. The 47-year-old died of a heart attack on December 30th, 2008. Eric Ray Frank played the role of David Trueheart. He was the long-lost brother of Tommy Oliver on Power Rangers Zeo. This was the 4th season of the franchise in 1996. Frank died on April 16, 2001 from an unspecified cause. He was only 29 years old. And now, here are 3 stories of murder and violence. Just a heads up, the first one deals with domestic violence. Will Mungasiva played Shane Clark, the Red Wind Ranger, in the 11th season of the show. The first episode of the 11th season, which was called Power Rangers Ninja Storm, aired in 2003. Mungasiva was born in Samoa and later lived in New Zealand. Mungasiva met Liz Sadler on Instagram in October 2016. They married in spring 2018. They each had a daughter from a previous relationship. Sadler's 7-year-old daughter, Layla, lived with them. In May 2019, Mungasiva and Sadler visited Wellington, New Zealand. On the night of May 11th, Mungasiva was drunk, angry, and he beat Sadler in their hotel room. He hit her head against the wall, and she started bleeding. In a daze, she ran into the shower, but Mungasiva kept punching her as she bled in the tub. She then went to the hospital. Mungasiva was found dead by suicide in the hotel room in the early morning. He was 38 years old. After he died, Sadler revealed dark truths about their relationship. 2 weeks before he died, Mungasiva was sentenced to 70 hours of community work and 6 months of supervision for assaulting his wife. The incident happened in June 2018 after the two of them were at a restaurant with friends. Mungasiva got mad about something Sadler said and he kicked her under the table. Sadler left the restaurant and went home. At around 11 p.m., Mungasiva arrived home, drunk. He woke up Sadler, spat in her face, and said they wouldn't be going together on an upcoming trip to Australia. Mungasiva went downstairs and had another drink. While Mungasiva was downstairs, Sadler hid their passports. Mungasiva found out that she hid them and got mad. He grabbed her arms and then hit himself in the face. Then he grabbed her neck and put her in a headlock. He then punched himself in the face again. Sadler said she would call the police, but Mungasiva threw her phone and broke it. Sadler took a taxi to the police station and had bruises on her face and her neck. Mungasiva's lawyer said that his behavior was out of character. But the lawyer also said that Mungasiva had finished an anti-violence program, was seeing a therapist for alcoholism, and was in couples counseling. Mungasiva was sentenced to 70 hours of community work and 6 months of supervision. The judge said that if Mungasiva did anything like that again, he'd face strangulation charges. At the time of his sentencing, Mungasiva's name, in this case, was kept secret to the public. Sadler couldn't talk about the abuse in public until the court order was lifted. The day it was lifted, she spoke to the media about her abuse. Sadly, this was not the only time there was violence in their relationship. In 2017, Mungasiva lost his license for drinking and driving, but he got on his motorcycle anyway. Sadler tried to stop him from driving. Mungasiva got angry and he drove over her foot. Sadler's leg and foot were burned. Sadler had also suffered 3 concussions from Mungasiva's attacks. He had also threatened to hurt Sadler's daughter. Layla, Sadler's young daughter, sometimes witnessed the domestic violence. Mungasiva told Layla that he would kill her mother or himself if she went to the police. Sadler's father noticed holes in the walls around his daughter's home and would see bruises on her face. She would say that Mungasiva was sorry and it wouldn't happen again, but sadly, it did. Sadler's father tried to intervene, but he feared that Mungasiva would stop him from seeing his daughter and granddaughter. Sadler said she went public with her story, because she wants other women to get help or to get out. She said she kept silent for too long and made excuses to protect him. Another tragic story from the Power Rangers is about Ricardo Medina Jr., who played Cole Evans, the Red Lion Wild Force Ranger in the 10th season of the show. Power Rangers Wild Force first aired in 2002. He also played Decker in the 2011 series Power Rangers Samurai. In late 2015, Medina moved in with Joshua Stutter in Palmdale, California. They were both 36 years old. Sutter loved animals and could fix anything. He helped his sister build and open a dog rescue and pet store in 2011 in Los Angeles. It was called Lucky Puppy. Sutter loved caring for the dogs at the store. Medina was hired to care for the animals at Lucky Puppy, but he was let go after he threatened to release the dogs into the wild. On January 31, 2015, Sutter was on the phone with his father, talking about growing organic vegetables to feed the dogs. Minutes later, just before 4 p.m., Medina and Sutter got into an argument over Medina's girlfriend. Allegedly, Sutter didn't want her at their apartment. Medina and Sutter got into a physical fight. Then Medina went to the bedroom with his girlfriend. Sutter forced Medina's bedroom door open. Medina stabbed Sutter multiple times in the abdomen with a sword that he kept in his room. Afterward, Medina called 911. Sutter was taken to the hospital and he was pronounced dead. Medina was immediately arrested and then later released because of a lack of evidence. He was arrested again less than a year later. He claimed he acted in self-defense. In March 2017, Medina pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and he was sentenced to 6 years of prison. There are rumors that Medina has already been released from prison, but that information is unclear. Skylar De Leon was a childhood actor. At 14 years old, she appeared in one episode of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. She was an extra in the 1993 episode Second Chance. Her career as an actor was rocky because she couldn't remember her lines. She later turned to a life of crime and spent time in jail for burglary. Skylar De Leon married Jennifer Henderson in 2002. This was before Skylar came out as a transgender woman. In early November 2004, Jennifer and Skylar were living in Long Beach, California. They saw an advertisement for a 55-foot yacht. The sellers were 47-year-old Jackie and 57-year-old Tom Hawks. They were a married couple from Arizona and they had lived on the yacht for a couple years. They named their yacht Well Deserved. Tom was a retired probation officer and Vietnam veteran. He spent decades saving money for his dream to live on a boat in retirement. Jackie was a homemaker and gym rat herself. They lived a life of adventure together. But in 2004, they decided to sell their boat to spend more time with their grandchild. The asking price was $440,000. The De Leons responded to their ad. At first, Jennifer met up with the Hawks. She brought their 9-month-old baby to gain their trust. They agreed to meet the following week for a test sale on November 15th. Skylar met the Hawks in Newport Harbor. Skylar brought along Alonzo McChain and John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Skylar had met McChain when she was in jail for burglary. McChain was a guard at the jail and they became friends. Kennedy and the De Leons got in touch through a mutual friend. She roped them into this murder and robbery plot by promising them money. Once on the ocean, McChain threatened Jackie in the kitchen with a stun gun. Skylar and Kennedy overpowered Tom in the lower area of the boat. They handcuffed them in the bedroom. They were taken up to the main cabin to sign a document that would transfer ownership of the boat to Skylar. Then the Hawks were tied together and then tied to an anchor. Tragically, the grandparents were thrown overboard. Their bodies have never been found. The Hawks' family and friends knew something was wrong. Tom's brother, Jim, went to Newport Beach and saw Well-Deserved parked in its usual spot. Jim was a retired police officer. The Hawks' car wasn't around, and no one had heard from the couple. He left a note on the Well-Deserved with his phone number. Jennifer called Jim and said that they had paid for the boat in cash. Jim grew even more suspicious when he found out that there was no activity on the Hawks' bank account. If the Hawks had just made hundreds of thousands of dollars, they probably would have put it in their bank account. Jim called the police to report the couple missing. On November 27th, the police searched the yacht. They found a receipt for bleach and garbage bags dated November 17th. They tracked down the buyer of the bleach and the garbage bags. It was Jennifer DeLeon's father. On December 16th, the Hawks' abandoned car was found in Mexico. The police learned that Skylar was a convicted felon and she drove it there. The police looked at the paperwork for the sale of the yacht. Skylar and McChain signed it. The police interrogated Skylar. Shelby told the police that she purchased the boat with drug money. On December 17th, the police arrested the De Leons on money laundering charges. The police searched the De Leons' home and found the Hawks' laptop and video camera. With all the evidence, the police were hot on their trail. Everything came together when McChain confessed to the murders. Ultimately, Skylar and Jennifer De Leon, Alonzo McChain, and John Fitzgerald Kennedy were charged with the murders. Jennifer De Leon went to trial in November 2006. She was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and murder for financial gain. She received 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. John Fitzgerald Kennedy went to trial in 2018. He was convicted of first-degree murder and murder for financial gain. He was sentenced to death. He is currently on death row at San Quentin State Prison. The death penalty was suspended in California in 2018. In 2019, Alonzo McChain pleaded guilty to 2 counts of voluntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison as part of a plea deal. He was a key witness at Skylar De Leon's trial. While awaiting trial, Skylar was charged with another murder. When the police had searched her home in the Hawks case, they found an interesting business card. It belonged to a Los Angeles police officer who had liaisons with police in Mexico. The police officer was investigating the murder case of 45-year-old John Jarvie. Jarvie was found dead in Mexico in 2003. His throat had been slit. It turned out that Jarvie and Skylar knew each other. They had served time in jail together and stayed in touch when they were released. In 2003, Skylar convinced Jarvie to join her in a business deal. Jarvie ended up getting Skylar $50,000 in cash. They met in Mexico for the so-called business deal, but Jarvie ended up being killed. Skylar went to trial in October 2008 for all 3 murders. She was found guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to death. 42-year-old Skylar De Leon is on death row at San Quentin State Prison. In all, at least 11 actors from Power Rangers have succumbed to the curse so far. Number 3. Mary Jean Reid. Oregon, Illinois is a small town 100 miles west of Chicago. It was home to an old restaurant called the Sten House. Strange things were known to happen at the restaurant. Over the years, employees claimed that they saw a young woman walk through the building before vanishing. Dishes would fall and break on their own. Because of the strange happenings, many employees refused to work late shifts. In the 1990s, Mike Arians took over the building. He opened a restaurant with the new name, the Roadhouse. As he fixed up the place, he felt creepy vibes. Many people thought several ghosts haunted the restaurant, but Arians had a different theory. He believed that it was haunted by just one ghost. In life, her name was Mary Jean Reed. Mary was born on November 15, 1930. As a teenager, she worked as a switchboard operator with the DeKalb Ogle Telephone Company. It was there that she met 28-year-old Stanley Skridlaw. Skridlaw was a Navy veteran from Rockville, Illinois. He had been working in the area as a telephone lineman. Despite their age difference, the two decided to go on a date. The date was scheduled for June 24, 1948, when Mary finished her shift. They visited several taverns that evening, and they were last seen at the Sten House at around 11:30 p.m. What happened after they left the Sten House is a mystery. At around 6 a.m. the next morning, John Eckert was on his way to work. Eckert, a State Highway Department employee, was driving along County Farm Road. The road was known to be a popular lover's lane. Eckert noticed a shoe lying beside the road and pulled over. There, he found Stanley Skridlaw's bullet-ridden body in the grass. Skridlaw's car was found abandoned a mile north of the lover's lane about an hour later. There were no bloodstains or bullet holes in the car. 17-year-old Mary Jane Reed, meanwhile, was missing. Her family, who had no idea she had been on a date, was concerned when she didn't come home. Mary normally called home when she was done work. She was also part of a bridal party for her brother's upcoming wedding that weekend. It was not like her to miss an important affair. When she wasn't found, the wedding was postponed. Her family held out hope that she was still alive. Searchers expanded over several counties. 5 days after Mary went missing, a truck driver hauling sand from a pit at the end of the lover's lane found her body. High weeds had hidden it. The news was shocking to the Reed family, who were assured by a fortune teller that she was still alive. Investigators interviewed over 50 people who were associated with Mary and Skridlaw. As for a motive, robbery was ruled out. Skridlaw's wallet was still with his body. Mary wore her mother's wedding ring, and it had not been taken. The police thought that the most plausible motive was a lover's quarrel, but the investigation and all the interviews led to dead ends. Mike Arians, who purchased the Sten House, was determined to get to the bottom of Mary's murder. He employed the help of author Ted Gregory to help solve the case. Gregory had written multiple articles about the murder that were published in the Chicago Tribune starting in 2003. His articles did not lead to any progress in the case. Mary's body was exhumed in August 2005 in the hopes of uncovering some more evidence. The examination turned out to be quite shocking. The medical examiner did not think that the skull in the coffin belonged to Mary. The medical examiner thought it belonged to a petite woman in her mid-20s, and Mary was only 17 and was described as having traits of someone who was big-boned. Since the examination, there have been no updates on the case. To date, Mary Jane Reed's and Stanley Skridlaw's murders are still a mystery. Number 2. Betty Williams. Odessa is a city located in western Texas. The city is known for its cowboy culture, oil rigs, and it's the setting for the book Friday Night Lights and the film adaptation. When football season comes to an end, there's not much for teens to do. Some teens would drink beer on Friday nights. Others would park across from Odessa High School and wait for sightings of a ghost known as Betty. People believe they have seen her ghost in the auditorium windows if they flashed their headlights and called her name. Tragically, Betty is not just some urban legend. She's a real person who was tragically murdered. On August 11, 1943, Betty Williams was born in Springfield, Illinois. Her family moved to Odessa in April 1955. Her family was deeply religious, but Betty loved to stand out. Betty dreamed of Broadway success, and she participated in many of her school's productions. She wanted to be accepted by her peers and be able to attend parties with the popular girls. But unfortunately, Betty was at the bottom of her school's hierarchy. In the summer of 1960, Betty began dating Mac Herring. Mac played on the football team for Odessa High School. Though he was a member of the popular crowd, he was known to be a quiet person. Betty fell hard for the football player. But Mac was discreet about his relationship with Betty. He never took Betty to parties with the popular kids. The two reportedly broke up a month into their courtship. After the breakup, Betty was depressed. She began to talk to her friends about suicide, but she told them she didn't have the courage to go through with it. So she asked a few of them if they would kill her. Her friends laughed off her suicidal comments and believed she just wanted attention. On the night of March 21st, 1961, Williams' friend, Ike Neal, drove her home after rehearsals. It was about 10 p.m., and Betty asked Ike to come back in half an hour and meet her in the alley behind her home. Ike returned at 10:30, and Betty came outside in her pajamas. Just as she was about to climb into his car, another vehicle appeared in the alleyway. The driver of the car was Mac Herring. Earlier in the night, Betty had told Ike that Mac had promised to kill her. Ike didn't think that Betty was being serious. Betty told Ike, "I've got to call his bluff, even if it kills me." Betty got into Mac's car and the pair drove off. But Betty didn't return home that night. Her family reported her missing 2 days later. The police began to interview Betty's friends and classmates. Mac was one of the people they interviewed. He said he dropped Betty off at home around midnight at her front door. The officer thought about his answer, and he thought it was odd. Betty had snuck out of her house through the back door. He doubted that she would have waltzed in through the front door when she got home. So Mac was questioned again. He admitted they had killed 17-year-old Betty Williams. Afterward, he dumped her body in a stock pond. He then took the police to her body. Mac explained that he didn't kill Betty in cold blood. He said that she had begged him to kill her. She had even picked out the 12-gauge shotgun to use to kill her. Betty had wanted to die for several reasons. The first was that she wasn't popular in high school. Secondly, Mac had broken up with her and was dating someone else. Also, there was a new drama teacher, and he wasn't impressed with Betty's acting skills. He had made her a stage manager instead of giving her a role in the play. Meanwhile, Mac had been given one of the lead roles. Mac said that Betty wanted to die, but she couldn't do it herself. She had begged him to kill her. He finally relented and agreed to do it. They drove out to the pond, and Betty was happy. Once there, they got out of the car. "Give me a kiss to remember you by," Mac said. They kissed, and she got down on her knees and said, "Now." Mac raised the gun and shot her point blank in the head. The shot nearly blew her entire head off. The police then recovered the 12-gauge shotgun that he used. It was in his home in a gun rack. A spent shell casing was still in the gun. The news that Mac Herring was behind the murder was a shock to the community. Several classmates had heard Betty talk about wanting to die, but they thought she had been joking. They thought that Betty and Mac had been trying to outbluff each other, and things went horribly wrong. Mac was charged with murder, and the prosecutor thought it would be an open and shut case. Mac admitted to the murder, led the police to the body, and he had the murder weapon in his possession. The prosecutor thought he should be executed for the murder because it was premeditated. Mac's defense lawyer argued that he was temporarily insane, so an insanity trial was held. It was determined that Mac was insane, he would not go to trial for murder. The trial began on February 19, 1962. The defense presented a letter that Betty had handwritten. The letter explained why she wanted to die. Then she wrote, "A friend of mine, seeing how great is my torment, has graciously consented to look after the details. His name is Mac Herring, and I pray he will not have to suffer for what he is doing for my sake. I take upon myself all blame, for there it lies, on me alone." One question on the stand, Mac said he could not recall how many times Betty had asked him to kill her. A local psychiatrist testified that Mac suffered from gross stress disorder when he shot Betty. The psychiatrist concluded the stress of Betty repeatedly asking him to kill her affected his logic. He said that Mac did not know what he was doing. Mac was found not guilty on grounds of temporary insanity on February 24, 1962. People say that Betty Williams' ghost continues to haunt Odessa High School to this day. Students say they feel her presence in the auditorium. Not much is known about Mac Herring's life after the trial ended. Mac Herring died on January 5, 2019. Number 1. Grace Brown. The Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York is a favorite vacationing spot for many people. The area covers about 6 million acres and is known for its wide range of forests, lakes, rivers, and outdoor recreation. The Adirondacks are home to a ghostly presence believed to have once been Grace Brown. Grace grew up in South Ostelic, a small community in south-central New York. Her family owned a small farm. As Grace grew up, she wanted to get out of the typical farm life and experience a different way of living. Her older sister, Ada, recently had wed and moved to Cortland, New York. Grace, then 18, followed her sister there in 1904 and found a job at the Gillette skirt factory. It was there that she began dating Chester Gillette, the owner's nephew. Chester, born on August 9, 1883, came from a wealthy family. As Grace was a farm girl, Chester's family did not think she was a suitable match for Chester, so they kept their relationship a secret. Chester would be frequently seen in public with young women from wealthy families. Though it upset Grace, she still pined after Chester. In May 1906, Grace found out she was pregnant. Being unwed, she risked being an outcast in society. Grace begged Chester to marry her. Chester put off her request for as long as he could, but then he finally seemed to give in after a few months. Chester took Grace on a trip to the Adirondack Mountains in July 1906. Grace thought that the getaway was a wedding trip. The couple would spend the first night in Utica before taking the train to Tupper Lake on the second night. On July 11th, they boarded a train back to Utica, stopping at Big Moose Lake along the way. Grace left her trunk at the train station as she was expecting to board the train later. Chester took everything with him, including the tennis racket he brought along. Chester rented a rowboat from a man named Robert Morrison. Morrison expected the couple to return around dinner time. When they did not return, Morrison became concerned. The following morning, Morrison arranged a search party. They came across the rowboat, which had capsized. The body of 20-year-old Grace Brown was floating in the water not far from the rowboat. Chester Gillette was nowhere to be found. He would later turn up at the Arrowhead Hotel in Inlet. Chester checked in under an alias, Carl Graham. Chester was confronted, and at first, he denied knowing Grace. Later, he claimed that she died by suicide because he didn't love her. But very few people believed his story. He was arrested for Grace's murder. At the trial, Chester maintained his innocence. The defense claimed that Grace died by suicide by jumping into the lake. Letters presented as evidence confirmed that Grace could not swim. In another letter, Grace told Chester that she wanted to die. The defense lawyer claimed that the boat capsized when Chester tried to save her. However, the autopsy revealed that Grace had bruises on her head. The prosecution argued that Chester hit Grace over the head and he did nothing to save her. She was at least 4 months pregnant when she died. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. They found Chester guilty of first-degree murder on December 5, 1906. On March 30th, 1908, Chester Gillette was executed in the electric chair. He was 24 years old on the day of his execution. It is believed that Grace Brown's restless spirit haunts Big Moose Lake. Several people claim they have felt her spirit. Rhonda Busselot, who had worked at the Covewood Lodge, felt a ghostly presence in the summer of 1988. As she walked towards the staff lodge, she felt someone was right in front of her. Busselot said she froze, as if her breath was taken away. Outside, her co-workers experienced something different. They saw a ghost for a few seconds before it floated away. At the time of this video, people still question if Grace Brown's spirit is trapped at Big Moose Lake. Number 3. Susan Dellinger. A crime in the early 1900s stained the reputation of a city with the happy-go-lucky name of Pleasureville. A curious dream that led police to the literal smoking gun in the case thrust the city, the crime, and the dreamer into the media worldwide. Pleasureville is an unincorporated community in south-central Pennsylvania. It's about 100 miles east of Philadelphia. The community is in York County, along with York and Emmetsville. In the early 1900s, the county's population was more than 116,000 people. 22-year-old Henry Snyder lived in Pleasureville with his parents. He was friends with 18-year-old William and 15-year-old Kervin Hoover. The Hoover brothers lived with their parents in Springettsbury Township, 2 miles east of Pleasureville. On Saturday, November 16, 1907, Snyder and the Hoover brothers met up and went to a store. Then they separated for the evening. Snyder met up with his 2 other friends, 17-year-old Lester Kaufman and 18-year-old Oscar Hoover. It's not clear if or how Oscar was related to William and Kervin, but they share the same last name. The trio went to York, which is 3 miles south of Pleasureville. Kaufman and Oscar went to a barber shop. Snyder went to a bar and had 2 beers. Then Snyder, Lester, and Oscar went to a different bar, and Snyder had 2 more beers. Then the 3 of them went to a different bar, and Snyder had 3 more beers. Then they went to a liquor store, and Snyder bought half a gallon of whiskey. The trio then went to a bar, and Snyder consumed 2 more beers. By this point, Snyder had drunk 9 beers. The trio was ready to head home to Pleasureville, so they hopped on a horse and buggy. About a mile out of York, they started drinking the whiskey. They ended up at a church in Pleasureville for some unknown reason. Snyder got out of the horse and buggy. Someone named Sarah Kindig, who lived nearby, was outside. She saw the 3 young men leave the church and walk down the road. Then she heard 4 gunshots. Reverend M.J. Heberly lived near the Pleasureville church. Around midnight, he heard the men fighting and then 4 gunshots. Then he saw a horse and buggy. Neither Mrs. Kindig nor Reverend Heberly were concerned though, because gunshots were common, so they thought people were firing their guns just for fun. The next morning, at around 6:30 a.m., a resident named Harry Steeple was walking down the road near the church. He came across 2 young men lying on the road. At first, Steeple thought that they were drunk and had passed out, so he went to wake them. Kervin Hoover was lying on his back next to a pool of blood and vomit. William Hoover was lying on his left side, about 10 feet away from his brother Kervin. There were splotches of blood on the road. Both William and Kervin Hoover had been shot in the right side of the head. They were still alive, but unconscious. Steeple ran into town and notified several people. Kervin Hoover was brought to his own home to die peacefully because it was evident that he couldn't be helped. Kervin died around noon on November 17, 1907. William was brought to York Hospital and died around 7 p.m. that evening. The same day the Hoover brothers died, York police arrested Henry Snyder, Lester Kaufman, and Oscar Hoover. The police found out that they were hanging out with the Hoover brothers the night before. Snyder said he was with the Hoover brothers Saturday night, but no one had a gun. He told the police he didn't even own a gun. But then the police found a .32 caliber revolver in his pocket. Then Snyder admitted that the weapon was his, and he begged the police not to tell his mother about the gun. All 3 young men claimed they had nothing to do with the murders of the Hoover brothers. Still, they remained in police custody. By Monday, Snyder started spinning a web of different stories about what happened on the night William and Kervin were shot. He said he was in a buggy with Kaufman and Oscar. Then he left and started walking home with Kervin and William. He said that Kaufman and Oscar had fired their guns from the buggy and hit Kervin and William. Snyder said he shot back at the buggy, but he didn't hit anyone. The police could not confirm Snyder's story. Then Snyder told the police that William and Kervin were arguing about whiskey that night. During their fight, William shot Kervin and then shot at Snyder. But if that were true, where was William's gun? It wasn't on him when he was found on the road. The police asked Snyder where they could find William's gun. Snyder said he had thrown it away, but if they looked around enough, they would find it. And if Snyder's story were true, then who shot William? Nevertheless, the police had little evidence to connect Snyder to the murders. That is until Susan Dellinger had the strangest dreams. Susan lived in Pleasureville with her husband, Frank, and their 14 children. They lived in town for about 50 years and were well respected. On November 18th, Susan went to bed, but she was restless. The whole town was talking about the Hoover brothers being murdered. She didn't know the Hoover boys well, but they were friends with her kids. As a mother, she felt terrible for the Hoover parents. Eventually, she managed to fall asleep. In her dream, she saw Snyder take William Hoover's revolver and throw it in a hide-the-ball field. In her second dream, she was looking for the gun. She walked down a road just a block north of where the bodies were found. She looked to the right into the field and saw the revolver lying in the grass. She wanted to grab the gun, but heard a man approaching her, so she walked away. It sounded like the man was right next to her, but she couldn't see anyone. She continued down the road and later turned around. She reached the field and could see the revolver again, but it sounded like that man was still right next to her. Before she could walk toward the gun in her dream, she woke up. She thought that the dreams were odd and told her family about them. In the following days, she felt disturbed by the dreams, like they might have actually meant something. She thought about telling the police, but she didn't want any publicity, so she kept quiet. But it seems that her children started telling other people. And by the end of the month, details about Susan's odd dreams reached Detective Charles White. Detective White was astounded to hear about her dreams. No one knew publicly that William Hoover's gun was missing after his murder. Yet, somehow, Susan dreamt that Snyder took William's gun and threw it into a field. In fact, the police didn't even know that William's gun was missing until his father, Charles Hoover, told the police a few days after the murders. Detective White interviewed Susan and asked if she could show him where he saw the gun in her dream. She reluctantly agreed to go with him to the field later that day. But before she could go, her son found the gun, exactly where Susan had seen it in her dream. 17-year-old George Albert found the revolver about 200 feet north of the murder scene, along the road that leads from the crime scene to Snyder's home. The gun was about 25 feet away from the fence at Hide-the-Ball Field. George brought the gun home and Susan kept it until she met up with Detective White. The police were amazed that Susan not only had this dream, but that it was accurate. Not only that, it was also the so-called silver bullet needed to connect Snyder to the murder. On November 28, 1907, police showed Snyder William Hoover's revolver. Snyder admitted to taking it from William and throwing it away. In early December 1907, Snyder confessed that he shot both Kervin and William. He said he had acted alone. Snyder was then charged with William and Kervin Hoover's murders. These are the details Snyder told the police. Snyder, William, and Kervin separated from Kaufman and Oscar at the church corner. Kaufman and Oscar drove home with a horse and buggy. Snyder and the Hoover brothers started walking down the road. The Hoover brothers wanted Snyder's whiskey, and Snyder said he didn't have any. The Hoover brothers didn't believe him. They started reaching for him, as if to search him for alcohol. Snyder pushed Kervin away and then shot him. William looked over at his brother and yelled, "Why, you have shot Kervin." Then Snyder realized William would tell the police, so he shot William too. Snyder took William's revolver out of his pocket, carried it down the road, and threw it into the field. On January 7, 1908, Snyder was brought to the court for his double murder charges. Snyder went to trial on April 21, 1908, for the first-degree murder of William Hoover. He was also charged with manslaughter in Kervin Hoover's death. Snyder was only charged with manslaughter because it was determined that he probably didn't premeditate Kervin's murder. Although Snyder had confessed, he pleaded not guilty. Susan Dellinger's dreams and the corresponding evidence were almost used as evidence during Snyder's trial, but the prosecution had Snyder's confession to the police. The prosecution also relied on comments Snyder said to his family in the days after the shooting. The day after the murders, Snyder said to his father that he was with the Hoover brothers the night before. Snyder also pointed to a location on the road near the church and said to his wife, "There are William's brains." On April 28, 1908, the jury deliberated for an hour and a half. The jury found 22-year-old Snyder guilty on all charges. Snyder was then sentenced to be hanged, but his lawyers presented a petition to the State Board of Pardons asking for Snyder's death sentence to be commuted to life in prison. They argue that Snyder wasn't responsible for his actions because he had epilepsy and he was extremely intoxicated when he killed the Hoover brothers. In 1909, Snyder was sentenced to life in solitary confinement in the Eastern Penitentiary in Philadelphia. Over the years, the Board of Pardons asked the counsel for Snyder's pardon. A pardon was refused in 1917 and 1922. But in March 1930, 23 years after the Hoover brothers were killed, Snyder was pardoned. The whole time, Snyder had maintained he was innocent. In May 1930, 44-year-old Snyder was released from prison after spending half of his life locked up. He returned to his family's farm near Pleasureville. In 1909, Susan Dellinger's dreams and her involvement in helping solve the crime were published in the Journal of Psychological Research. Her dreams got worldwide publicity, and at the time, it was regarded as one of the strangest dreams on record. Number 2. B.F. Pearson. 55-year-old Martin F. Schwab was a Mormon from Payson, Utah. Martin was one of the best salesmen at the Champion Cash Register Company. His employer recently assigned him to sell cash registers in Arizona. In March 1920, Martin left his wife and 5 children in Utah for work. On April 13, 1920, Martin checked into the commercial hotel in Flagstaff, Arizona. The next day, Martin drove his 7-passenger Chandler car to Walnut Canyon, Arizona. Walnut Canyon is about 15 miles east of Flagstaff. He returned to Flagstaff later that night. On April 15th, Martin sent a letter to his wife, Malvina, back in Payson. He sent a letter to her every day and said that he would write to her later that day. He planned to travel to Winslow, Arizona next. It is about 60 miles west of Flagstaff. He stopped at a store in Flagstaff and then left in his Chandler towards Winslow, Arizona. His plan after Winslow was to visit 5 other cities in Arizona and end up in Phoenix, Arizona. By early May, Martin's wife, Malvina, was worried about her husband. She last received a letter from him dated April 15th and nothing since. Malvina contacted the media, and on May 7th, a paper in Arizona published an article about Martin with the headline, "Lost Somewhere in Arizona." By the end of May, Martin's colleagues were worried too. They also hadn't heard from Martin since mid-April. The hotel was the last place he had written from, so a representative from Martin's work visited Flagstaff to look for him. People thought that Martin had been swallowed up by the mysterious desert between Flagstaff and Winslow. Then, on September 8th, the police received a strange letter that made them think that Martin Schwab had been murdered. Flagstaff Sheriff Jack Harrington had received the letter from a man named Roy Gardner. Gardner wrote the letter on behalf of his friend, B.F. Pearson. Pearson was a 78-year-old spiritualist who lived near Salt Lake City, Utah, who had dreams that always came true. Pearson had never visited Arizona, and he didn't know Martin Schwab personally. Amazingly, Pearson had a vivid dream that would end up proving to connect the dots of Martin's disappearance. Pearson dreamt that Martin was in Flagstaff and started driving towards the southeast. Martin picked up two men about 20 miles outside of Flagstaff. The road turned south and they drove up a hill. At the top of the hill, Martin stopped to fix something on the car. After fixing it, the two men killed him. The men then took Martin's body about 300 feet to the right of the road, wrapped him in a blanket, put his body in the ravine, and covered him with some dirt. The man then drove to a different city and got rid of his car. The three men then went to Phoenix, Arizona, then Denver, Colorado, then Butte, Montana. The Undersheriff W.A. Campbell and County Ranger S.O. Thompson wrote Gardner and Pearson back asking for more information on Martin's case. Another letter arrived at the police station on September 18th. Pearson said that Martin had been killed and buried in a barren area full of clay or sand halfway between Flagstaff and Winslow. He said that there were no woods or rocks around. He said that the body was about 100 yards from the road. He sent a sketch that showed the San Francisco mountain peaks and a road where the police could find Martin's body. The San Francisco mountains are about 30 miles north of Flagstaff. Pearson indicated that Martin's body was just a couple miles west of Flagstaff. Strangely, Pearson's description and the sketch describing the location of Martin's body didn't match. On September 23rd, Sheriff Campbell and County Ranger Thompson searched the area where Pearson first described by a ravine halfway between Flagstaff and Winslow. Near the road, they found a ravine and dug for hours, but they didn't find anything. The next day, 16-year-old cattle herders Bertram Hoffman and Leo Sales stumbled upon a horrifying sight. In an empty well about 2 miles west of Flagstaff, Bertram noticed something odd. There was a well that was only about 5 feet deep, so he climbed in. He saw part of a typewriter in the dirt and picked it up. When he picked it up, it revealed a decaying face. Terrified, the boys ran back to town and the police were called. The police investigated and determined it was the body of 55-year-old Martin Schwab. In the well was Martin's coat and his cash register. His body had been covered in dirt that was pushed in from the edge of the well with a shovel. The coroner determined that Martin had died of gunshot wounds from a .38 caliber revolver. He was shot in the chest and the head. His car was nowhere to be found. Amazingly, Martin's body was found exactly where Pearson had indicated in his sketch, 2 miles west of Flagstaff. The defunct well was near a ravine, railroad, and a road. Pearson was right that Martin had been buried in clay or sand, and that his body was wrapped in some type of cloth and then covered in dirt. By early October, the police were interviewing people in Flagstaff. Over the next couple of months, the police had several suspects. Of course, the police investigated Pearson, the man who somehow knew where Martin Schwab's body was buried. But the police determined he wasn't connected to the crime in any way. The police spoke with a local resident named Tony Montoyo. He told the police he saw Martin at a store in Flagstaff the day he went missing. Martin entered the store and had a 22-year-old good-looking, clean-shaven man in the passenger seat of his car. The man was wearing a big white hat and tan leather leggings. He was about 5'7" and weighed around 140 pounds. The police spoke with Joe Bender, the owner of a taxi company near the commercial hotel where Martin had been staying. On April 15th, Bender saw Martin and a young man leave in Martin's Chandler car heading towards Winslow. Bender knew the young man because he had been in Bender's office asking for work. His name was Harry Nash. Not only that, but Bender saw Harry return to Flagstaff on the night of April 15th, alone, in the Chandler car. Harry told Bender he bought the Chandler for $800. Then Bender saw Harry and his wife in the Chandler on 2 different days. Harry also told a local man named Hugh Best that he was planning on buying Martin's car. Harry told Best that Martin was asking $2,000 for the car. Harry said he was going to Winslow with Martin and he was going to try and talk him down to $1,500. After Martin was murdered, Harry told Best that he bought the car off Martin for $1,500. In January 1921, Sheriff Frank Foss saw a Chandler car for sale. Foss worked in Weiser, Idaho, a city very close to the Oregon border. He noticed that someone had done a bad job changing a 2 to an 8 on the license plate. Local police started investigating because something sketchy was obviously going on. The police found out that the car had belonged to Martin Schwab. Foss called the police at Flagstaff. The person who now owned the car was named J.E. Freeman. Freeman was a cattleman from Boise, Idaho. When interrogated, Freeman said he bought the car from a man named Harry Nash on October 14, 1920. Freeman paid $525 for the car. Freeman even had a bill of sale with Harry's name on it. Freeman said that Harry was with his wife and 3 men at the time of the sale. The police then found out that Harry Nash had checked into the commercial hotel in Flagstaff, Arizona on April 3, 1920. That's 10 days before Martin Schwab checked into the same hotel. Harry checked in with his wife, Peggy. The couple was from Gallup, New Mexico, and they arrived at Flagstaff by train. They were both 21 years old and both looking for work. Harry was a cow rancher and Peggy was a waitress. Harry was a good-looking, sociable guy whose family described him as wild. On April 15th, Harry left with Martin for Winslow in his Chandler. They stopped at the Walnut Canyon dwellings, perhaps just to view the National Monument. Martin signed his name as the visitor. Harry signed his name right under Martin's. Walnut Canyon is about 50 miles east of Winslow. But Martin never reached Winslow. Harry was seen the next day driving the Chandler in Flagstaff. The police also found out that Harry had traded in Martin's watch. After Martin was killed, Harry and Peggy went to several rodeos with 3 other ranchers. Roy Nash was Harry's brother, and Coyote, Olivas, and Buffalo Brady were Harry's friends. In January 1921, all the men were charged with Martin Schwab's murder. Harry Nash was extradited to Arizona. Harry denied killing Martin. Harry told the police that he bought the car from a man named Clayton Robbins, who brought the car to Flagstaff from Utah. Harry said he paid $925 for the car in cash. Harry denied telling anyone that he was buying Martin's car, but the police didn't buy his story. Then, on January 25th, Harry confessed to killing Martin Schwab in self-defense. Here's what Harry said in his confession. He drove to Walnut Canyon with Martin on April 14th. Harry intended on going to Winslow the next day to find work. Martin also happened to be going to Winslow on April 15th. Martin offered to drive Nash so they could split the cost. When they were halfway to Winslow, Harry asked Martin how much he would owe him for the ride. Martin said $20. Today, that equals about $290. Harry was outraged, and he said he couldn't afford that. Martin then cut the cost to $15. Harry said he couldn't even pay that. So Martin told him to get out and walk. Martin then stopped the car to fix something under the radiator. While Martin was fixing the car, he and Harry continued to fight. Harry started letting the air out of the tires. Martin noticed what he was doing and then grabbed his gun and threatened to shoot Harry. Martin told Harry he wouldn't be the first man he shot. Harry said that he didn't normally carry a gun, but he happened to have one on him that day. He pulled out the gun and shot Martin. Martin had shot back, but missed. Harry shot Martin again and killed him. Harry put Martin's body in the car and drove back to Flagstaff. Harry said he intended to turn himself in to the police, but that he changed his mind. He spent the night in Flagstaff. He put Martin's body in the trunk and left it there overnight. In the morning, after Harry's wife, Peggy, went to work, Harry drove the car to an old well. He dumped Martin's body and covered it with dirt using the shovel that was in the car. Harry claimed he didn't even know Martin's name. Harry stole Martin's watch and gun and sold them. Harry said he didn't know what to do with Martin's car, so he sold it. The police didn't believe that Harry shot Martin in self-defense. Because Harry's confession indicated that the other men weren't involved in the murder, the charges against them were dropped. Harry Nash went to trial on August 8, 1921. The biggest question of the trial was whether Martin Schwab was armed. If he had been armed, it's possible that Harry's story about self-defense could be true. Harry said that he had Martin's gun. It was a .32 Colt automatic revolver. But his wife, Peggy, brought it to Los Angeles and his brother pawned it. So there was no physical proof that Martin was armed. Also, Harry said in his confession that he didn't know what to do with Martin's car after he died. But before Martin died, Harry told a couple of people in town that he wanted to buy Martin's car. So part of his confession didn't make any sense. The trial wrapped up on September 2nd, 1921. The jury deliberated for 37 hours. Harry Nash was found guilty of the second-degree murder of Martin Schwab. He was sentenced to 65 to 75 years at the state prison in Florence, Arizona. Many considered Harry lucky for narrowly missing a sentence to be hanged. But that's not the end of the story for Harry Nash, though. On March 2nd, 1926, 26-year-old Nash didn't appear at the prison roll call. Prison officials soon turned toward a prison guard named Don Kemberling, who was on duty the night before. He confessed that he had let Harry scale over the east wall during the night. The night of March 1st, 1926, Harry had been in charge of the prison's flour mill, and he slept there. At about 10:30 p.m., Harry exited the mill, tossed a rope over the wall, and climbed over. Harry escaped in Kemberling's car, which was parked a quarter mile from the prison. Kemberling had served in the First World War and suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, which at the time was called shell shock. It's believed that Harry knew that Kemberling would be easy to gain sympathy from, and Harry had been right. Harry Nash was caught in 1949, 23 years after he escaped. 49-year-old Harry was arrested in January 1949 at a ranch in Callahan, Colorado. Callahan is a small town about 35 miles northeast of Colorado Springs. In his 2 decades of freedom, Harry started calling himself Hugh Nolan. He did odd jobs around the country for the first 3 years after his escape. He lived in California for 16 years and worked on the railroad. Later, he moved to Callahan, Colorado and worked at the ranch. He married the daughter of the farmer he was working for. How the police found him there wasn't revealed to the public, other than that a tip came from another state. Harry was extradited to Arizona to finish his sentence. Now that we're done with Harry Nash's story, let's go back to how weirdly accurate B.F. Pearson's dream was. As we mentioned, Pearson accurately sketched where Martin Schwab's body could be found. Pearson also dreamt that Martin was driving 2 men from Flagstaff to Winslow. We know for sure that Harry was in the car and they were driving from Flagstaff to Winslow. At the top of the hill, Martin stopped the car to fix something. After fixing the car, Martin was shot. That's essentially what Harry said in his confession. Pearson said that the killer got rid of the car in a different city. Harry sold the car in Idaho. Pearson dreamt that the people involved in the murder went to Phoenix, Arizona, then Denver, Colorado, then Butte, Montana. After Harry killed Martin, he drove his car to New Mexico, then Nebraska, then Cheyenne, Wyoming. Harry's brother, Roy, joined him and Peggy. They went to a rodeo in Elko, Nevada, where Coyote Olivas joined them. Then the 4 drove to Boise, Idaho, and met up with Buffalo Brady. Then the 5 drove to Weiser, Idaho. There, Harry sold the Chandler to J.E. Freeman. Harry gave the money to Brady that he owed him. Then Brady went back home to Butte, Montana. Soon after, Brady was arrested in Butte. Olivia's went to Portland, Oregon, and the police looked for him, but they couldn't find him. Harry, Roy, and Peggy went to Los Angeles, California, where Harry was arrested. Roy was sick with typhoid fever, but the police put him under surveillance. Then Harry escaped prison and was caught in Colorado. Okay, so Pearson did not get the cities right, but amazingly, he nailed the states. There's little published after Pearson helped solve this case. What is known is that he was described as a pleasant, entertaining, and unassuming gentleman. He was a regular at the Latter-day Saints Church. Number 1. Virginia Smith. Kids are said to experience the supernatural because they have fewer filters than adults when it comes to believing in ghosts. Normally, hearing your kids say they saw a ghost would be creepy. But in the case of the Smith family, little Virginia's unexplained experience was a saving grace. 8-year-old Virginia Smith went by the nickname Ginny. In the 1940s, she lived in Wadley in east central Georgia. At the time, Wadley had a population of more than 1,000 people. Ginny lived with her siblings, 5-year-old Sissy and 3-year-old Clyde, and her parents. Her father, 42-year-old W. Clyde Smith, was a gas station operator. He had retired from his job as a jail warden. On January 9, 1942, Clyde went to work at the gas station. But he didn't come home. The next day, his wife called the police to report him missing. A search party was sent out that morning. In the afternoon, 2 boys were hunting in the woods outside of Wrightsville. Wrightsville is about 25 miles south of Wadley. The 2 boys brought their dog hunting with them. The dog started chasing a rabbit, so the boys chased after him. As they ran, they tripped over something about 100 yards from Bethsaida Church. It turned out to be a human body. They ran back to town and informed the police. The body was identified as 42-year-old W. Clyde Smith. He had been shot in the back of the neck with a shotgun at close range. The shot would have killed him instantly. Police found several different footprints around Clyde's body and determined several people were involved with the murder. But that's about all they knew. The footprints were so faint they couldn't make them out. Aside from the faint footprints in Clyde's car parked at the church, there were no other clues. The week after Clyde's murder, the police determined the motive was robbery. Clyde had $215 in cash stolen from him. That's about $3,300 today. Clyde was carrying that cash on him because the gas truck was supposed to deliver fuel on January 10th before the bank opened. So Clyde had taken out the cash the night before the delivery to pay for the gas in the morning. The police thought that whoever killed Clyde must have known his routine, meaning the killer or killers were probably connected to Clyde's business. But aside from fuel, the gas station also sold groceries and soft drinks. So there are many different people he would have had to interact with at his business. 1 week to the day after his murder, 8-year-old Ginny was in her bedroom. Her mother, only known as Mrs. Smith, walked into the room. She told Ginny to come to the kitchen for breakfast. Ginny had the blankets covering her head, and Mrs. Smith could hear her crying. Mrs. Smith asked Virginia what was wrong. Ginny threw the blankets off and cried that she had recently seen her father. Mrs. Smith thought she was making the story up and told her to be quiet. Ginny insisted that she saw her father in a dream. Mrs. Smith had tears in her eyes, sat down on the bed, and checked if Ginny had a fever. Ginny hugged her mom and wept. She said that in her dream, her dad looked like he did on the day they last saw him. He was even wearing the same clothes from that day. Ginny told her mom that in her dream, her father told her, "Ginny, I've been shot." Mrs. Smith told Ginny, "Honey, please don't go on like that. You didn't see your daddy. He's dead." For kids, death can sometimes be a hard concept to grasp. But Ginny told her mother that in her dream, her dad said, "I'm dead." Not just that, Clyde told his daughter, who shot him. Right there on the bed, 8-year-old Ginny listed off 3 names. She said Clifford Salters, Alvin McKenzie, Morris Mincy, and another man murdered her dad. Virginia added that they lured him to beside a church and killed him. Mrs. Smith sat back, stunned. "Ginny, you mustn't say things like that," Mrs. Smith said. But Virginia continued. Her father told her he had been shot with a shotgun and robbed. Mrs. Smith sat back up now. Ginny collapsed into her mom, sobbing. They sat on the bed in an embrace for some time. Then Mrs. Smith walked into the kitchen where her father was sitting. He was a 70-year-old farmer named John Price. Mrs. Smith told Price what Virginia had said. Price called the police chief. Price knew the chief because it was a small town. He told the chief, "You know, I ain't an overly suspicious man, but something just happened a little while ago I want to tell you about." Price recounted Ginny's dream and recalled the names of the men she had mentioned. The chief responded that he didn't have any other clues and there was no harm in questioning the men. The police questioned 34-year-old Salters, 19-year-old McKenzie, and 19-year-old Mincy. After they were questioned, the police released them. But some of the things they said made the police raise their eyebrows. So the chief called the Georgia State Bureau of Investigation in Atlanta for a second opinion. The chief in Atlanta sent 2 investigators to Wadley. In mid-February, the Atlanta detectives questioned Mincy. Mincy succumbed to the pressure and confessed he was involved with the crime, along with Salters and Mackenzie. Amazingly, Ginny's dream was exactly right, that these 3 men were involved in her father's murder. Police interrogated Mackenzie and Salters, and they also confessed. The police found out the name of the 4th man little Ginny had also mentioned after her dream. He was 44-year-old Marvin Dixon, a factory worker in Wadley, just like the other men. Salters, Mackenzie, and Mincy told the police Dixon was the one who fired the gun, killing Clyde Smith. The police interrogated Dixon, but he maintained his innocence. Nevertheless, they were all arrested and held in jail. Ginny's amazing story caught the attention of the media. By March, her contribution to the case so far, based on her dream, was published in newspapers. She became somewhat famous in Georgia and earned the nickname Dream Girl. People in town treated her like a queen. In their confession, the men recounted what happened on the night of January 9th, 1942. The men said that all 4 of them went to Clyde's work on the night he was murdered. They entered the store one by one around closing time. Wadley was a small town, and all the men were regulars at the station, so somehow they knew that Clyde had cash on him. Once all the men were in the gas station, Mincy announced that he had a gallon of whiskey hidden behind the Bethesda church. The other men piped up and said they wanted to drink some. None of them had a car, and they knew that Clyde was a nice man who would probably offer to drive them. They were right. Clyde didn't drink, but he offered to drive them to the church out of pure kindness. They all piled into Clyde's car. Dixon got into the back seat with a shotgun hidden in a burlap sack. They arrived at the church at around 11 p.m. By this time, Dixon had unwrapped the gun. Clyde got out of the driver's seat, and then Dixon got out of the back seat. Clyde was facing ahead, while Dixon was behind him. From close range, Dixon shot Clyde in the back of the neck. All 4 men then dragged Clyde's body into the woods. They took his pocketbook, watch, and money. The 4 men fled the scene in different directions and met up nearly a mile behind the church. They split the money and called it a night. All 4 men were charged with Clyde Smith's murder, and they went before a grand jury in April 1942. Salters and Mincy said they witnessed Dixon shoot Clyde. Mackenzie now said he knew nothing of the crime. Dixon said he was innocent. In May 1942, Dixon went to trial separately. He was found guilty of murder, and he received a life sentence. In May 1942, Salters and Mincy went to trial together. They were both convicted and given life sentences. In November 1942, Mackenzie went to trial. He was acquitted. Though Mackenzie got away, 8-year-old Virginia Smith's dreams brought justice to her father, 42-year-old W. Clyde Smith. Number 3. Philip Corrigan, England. 4-year-old Philip Corrigan loved sleeping. Every night, he hoped he would dream about the house and the characters that were so familiar to him. It was like his brain was playing a sitcom. The story followed a working-class family in Bradford, England, the same city he lived in. The family didn't have a TV, so at night they would gather around and tell each other stories. The father was strict. The mom was plump and bubbly. Their 3 daughters were close. In his dreams, Corrigan was one of the daughters. The girl wore blouses and long skirts. The girl would put her hair in a bun when she went out. She slept in the bedroom at the top of the house. Nothing much happened in Corrigan's dreams. The girl would go out for walks, go to school, and go to the movies. Even though Corrigan was young, he recognized that these dreams were different from other dreams. Part of what made these dreams different is that as he grew, the girl in his dreams grew as well. But when he was in his mid-20s, the dreams he had with the nice girl and her family faded. As an adult, Corrigan started reading about reincarnation. He felt like he had been the girl he dreamt about in his previous life. When Corrigan was in his 30s, he remembered the house he saw when he was 14. He worked on the paper route, and one of the houses he delivered to was called Allenthorpe. The name sounded familiar to him from the start. It was one of the 2 houses he dreamt about often, but it wasn't the house that had the nice family. Every time he came close to the house on his paper route, he was scared of the driveway for some reason. Now, as an adult, Corrigan visited Allenthorpe again. He asked neighbors in the area if they knew who had lived in the house. One of the neighbors told him that someone was murdered on the driveway. Philip said, "Don't tell me. It was a young woman, slim, with light brown hair up in a bun, in her 20s, and she wouldn't have had 2 sisters younger than her, would she?" The neighbor was baffled because he was right, and this murder happened decades earlier. The neighbor told Corrigan that the murdered woman was Lillian Bland. She died on January 2nd, 1914, on the driveway of the Allenthorpe home. City Councilor John Guy lived in the house. Around 11 p.m. that night in 1914, Guy was walking his dog. Within 5 minutes of walking down the street, he heard screams and gunshots in the direction he had just come from. He ran towards the screams and discovered a young woman lying on his driveway. She was bleeding from the mouth and the head. A man was standing over her. The man told Guy to go away, but Guy started running toward him. The man turned the gun on himself and died. Guy ran inside his home and called the police. The people on Guy's driveway were 26-year-old Lillian Bland and 26-year-old John Pitts. Bland had 2 gunshot wounds behind her right ear. Pitts had 1 gunshot behind his right ear. At the scene of the crime, the police found a razor blade covered in blood. Bland was pronounced dead at the scene. Pitts was unconscious but alive for another 2 hours, and then he died. Guy was hailed as a hero for standing up to a man with a gun. Pitts and Bland had dated for 6 years and intended on getting married. But Pitts got into gambling, spent his inheritance money, and was in trouble at work. So Bland broke up with him. Yet the 2 of them remained friendly and hung out. Bland had been cheerful and kind. She worked as a burler and mender, meaning she fixed mistakes in fabric before it was sent out. Pitts had been a mill hand, but he wasn't working before his death. Corrigan began doing more research on Bland and Pitts. He noticed parallels between his life and Bland's life. Bland worked with textiles, and Corrigan's first job was working in a textile warehouse. Corrigan visited the warehouse Bland used to work at. He had felt a familiar feeling, like the building hadn't changed that much. He felt something in the corner of the room, as if it were lingering energy of Bland. Perhaps it's where Bland had sat. Corrigan grew up going to the same church as Bland. When Corrigan was 11 years old, his parents bought a grocery store near her house. Even stranger, as a kid, Corrigan used to play in the field across from her house. The day Corrigan visited Bland's house, he was an adult. The owner of the house happened to be a clairvoyant. The house owner saw Philip and immediately said, "You're the young girl that lived here." Yet the owner hadn't known the story of Bland or how she used to live in that house. Corrigan visited Bland's grave at the age of 36 and felt a deep sense of loss. He thought that her murder had been blocked out of his memory to protect him from the trauma. But he did think there was more to the crime than what had been reported. Corrigan believed that the killer was John Guy, the man who came upon Bland and Pitts in his driveway. Part of the reason why Corrigan believed this was because Guy was the only witness. And Corrigan had heard rumors that Bland had been in a relationship with Guy while she and Pitts were broken up. Here's what Corrigan thought happened the day Bland died. Witnesses saw Bland and Pitts together that day, being close and friendly together like a romantic couple. The two had been walking near Guy's house when he spotted them. Perhaps out of a jealous rage, Guy came out of the house with a gun and antagonized Pitts. Pitts pulled out a razor. Then Guy shot Pitts once in the head. Then Bland twice in the head. However, Corrigan's version of the story will likely never be proven. Corrigan acquired Bland's birth and death certificates. He said he felt like he had lost a member of his family. He said he was terrified of dying until he found out about Bland. Then he wasn't worried about dying because he thinks that death is about moving to a different plane. Corrigan felt like he could finally accept Bland's life and his own, and he felt he may have solved her murder. Bland's family has contacted Philip Corrigan, saying the details he knows about the murder are accurate. Corrigan was hoping that the family would welcome him back, but the family has asked him to please stop talking about the murder. If he's still alive at the time of this video, Philip Corrigan would be 64 years old. Number 2. 3-year-old in Golan Heights. Eli Lass was a physician who coordinated health services in the Gaza Strip. After his career as a medical doctor, he became a spiritual healer. He became fascinated with reincarnation. He investigated a reincarnation case of a boy we'll call David because his name hasn't been made public. The boy was born with a long birthmark on his head. His parents followed the Druze religion. Reincarnation is an important foundation of that religion. And if children are born with birthmarks, it's believed the marks are trauma wounds from a previous life. David's family lived in Golan Heights. The area used to be part of Syria until it was captured and annexed by Israel. When David was 3 years old, he told his parents that he was murdered in a past life. He said someone hit him in the head with an axe in a neighboring community. David's father and other relatives decided to visit the community with David. Dr. Lash was invited to join the group since he was studying reincarnation. The group arrived in the village and asked David if he recognized anything. David said it wasn't the village he lived in, so they walked to another nearby village. Again, David said it wasn't the village he had lived in. They went to a third village, and this time, David said it was where he had lived. As they walked through the community, David remembered the names of people who lived there. He even named his previous first and last name. David also pointed out his previous home. By this time, David's group had gained bystanders. One of the villagers recognized David's previous name. The villager said that the man disappeared 4 years ago and had never been found. It wasn't uncommon for people to go missing in that area. Golan Heights was a contentious area between Syria and Israel, where people suspected of being spies were killed or taken as prisoners. More villagers joined the group, and David recognized one of them. 3-year-old David walked up to a man and said the man's name aloud. The man said that yes, that was his name. Then David told him, "I used to be your neighbor. We had a fight, and you killed me with an axe." The man's face went white. David said, "I even know where you buried my body." David then led the group to a nearby field. The man David accused followed them. David stopped in front of a pile of stones and said, "He buried my body under these stones and the axe over there." The group dug, and the skeleton of an adult male was found, along with the clothes of a farmer. The skull had a crack on it, just like David's birthmark on his head. The man admitted to the group that he did kill the man and buried him right there in the ground. The axe was also dug up nearby. Dr. Lash asked the group what they would do with the murderer. They told him they wouldn't bring him to the police, but they would punish him somehow. It is unknown what happened to the murderer or David. This account from Eli Lash is published in the book Children Who Have Lived Before. Lash died in 2009. Number 1. Abid Zuzulma, Turkey. Abid Zuzulma was a successful farmer in Adana, Turkey. On January 31st, 1957, an employee called Abid to a stable. The employee said an animal was sick and needed Abid's help. So Abid entered the stable. At that moment, someone hit Abid on the head with a hammer. Abid died instantly. When Abid didn't return home, one of his wives, he had 2, went looking for him. Her name was Shahidi, and she was pregnant. Sadly, the man hit her with a hammer and killed her as well. The killer stole the jewelry she was wearing. Then the murderers went to the Zuzulma's home to rob it. During the robbery, Abid's 2 youngest children, named Zini and Ismet, caught the attention of the killers, so they were murdered as well. Abid's other 3 children were at home at the time, but they somehow avoided the killers. 8 months after the quadruple murder, Ismail al-Tikinlik was born. When Ismail was 18 months old, he started walking and talking. Even though his vocabulary was simple, he started talking about his life as Abid Zuzulma. His parents would call him Ismail, but he would say his name was Abid. He refused to respond to the name Ismail. He was so persistent that years later, his parents enrolled him in school as Abid. They eventually changed his name from Ismail to Abid. When he was a few years old, Ismail said he had 2 wives. One was named Hatija, and the other was named Shahidi. Ismail also said he had children, Gul Saren, Ziki, and Kismet. These were the names of Abid's children who survived the murders. Ismail also said that he, his wife, and his 2 children had been killed. He said that the killers had owed Abid money, and that's why they murdered him. Ismail said that Razmazan was the employee who lured Abid to the stable. He said his wife, Shahidi, and his 2 youngest kids were killed. The surviving family of Abid wanted to meet with Ismail to test his knowledge. So Ismail's family brought him to Abid's homes. He had 2 homes, one for each wife. The family asked him which home the murders happened in. Ismail chose correctly. Zeki and Kismet, 2 of the surviving children, greeted Ismail with a kiss. They accepted that Ismail was the reincarnation of their father. Hadi Susama, Abid's first wife, accepted Ismail as her reincarnated husband. They hugged and both cried. The story doesn't end there though. A year after Ismail was born, a baby girl named Jivryu was born. She was the daughter of Karim Bairu and his wife, Jamila. When Jivryu was 1 year old, she started talking about her previous life as Sahidi Zuzuma, Abid's second wife, who was murdered. She eventually said Ramazan killed. When Shiryu's vocabulary expanded, she said that the murderers took her necklace. She also said she had been pregnant and the child was born after her death. Eventually, Shahidi's tomb was opened. Sadly, a dead baby was protruding from Shahidi's body. The Zulzuma and LT Keenlink families eventually heard about Jivryu. Zeki and Kismet, the children of Abid, believe that Jivryu was their reincarnated mother. Then Ismail and Jivryu met and talked about the life they had as Abid and Shahidi. At age 10, Ismail said he wanted to marry Shahidi again in his new life. He held on to this idea for years. But Jivryu wasn't too keen on this idea though. By the time they were teenagers, Jivryu was embarrassed to talk about her past life. So they didn't get married. 5 people were arrested for the murders of Abid, his wife, and 2 children. 2 of the people who were arrested were released. 1 person was sent to prison. Ramazan and Mustafa were both hanged. When Ismail found out the 2 men were hanged, he clapped with joy. Number 3. The Hardin House. Located 22 miles from downtown Orlando, Florida, is the small city of Claremont. The city was established in 1885, and the following year, a big white Victorian-style house was built on the corner of what is now 5th Street and Osceola Street. Nearly 90 years later, in 1974, Victoria Hardin inherited the home, and then she, her husband, John Hardin, and their 9-month-old son moved into the house. The family had previously lived in Jacksonville, Florida. Victoria was John's second wife. His first wife and 4 children from that marriage still lived in Jacksonville. In Claremont, John owned and operated a commercial refrigeration company. On the night of March 22, 1975, John got a service call. The owner of a drive-in restaurant in Groveland, a city about 5 miles from Claremont, needed a piece of equipment fixed. Victoria decided to go with him, so she brought their son. The family returned home at 10:45 p.m. Victoria put the baby to bed, and then she got into bed herself. John got into the shower. When John finished in the shower, he looked out the window and saw that his truck was on fire. He yelled to Victoria to grab their son and get out of the house. He was worried that the fire might spread to the house. The old Victorian house had 2 staircases. John ran down the stairs to the back of the house that led to the kitchen. He grabbed a fire extinguisher and then went out the back door to the back porch. He ran to the truck and tried to put the fire out with the extinguisher. Suddenly, there was a loud explosion. Victoria, who was heading out of the house with the baby, thought that the truck had exploded. Some neighbors saw the fire and heard the explosion, so they went outside. They noticed John lying on the ground. He was bleeding from the chest. It turned out the 32-year-old John Hardin had been shot in the chest with a shotgun. Victoria went back inside the house and tried to call 911, but the phone was dead because the phone line had been cut. A neighbor was able to call 911 and John was rushed to the hospital. Tragically, the 32-year-old father of 5 died 5 hours after arriving at the hospital. The police conducted an intense murder investigation. In some bushes on the Hardin property, they found a 20-gauge shotgun. The police surmised that while the family was at a service call, the killer cut the phone line and hid in the bushes. When the family returned home and went inside, they possibly walked by the shooter. Then the shooter set the truck on fire to lure John outside. Once he was outside, they shot him once in the chest. The killer dropped the gun and fled. The Hardin house was only a few blocks from Lake Mineola. The police suspected that the shooter ran to a boat ramp that was just 2 blocks from the crime scene. Then they escaped using something like a rowboat. Unfortunately, no one has ever been arrested for the murder of 32-year-old John Hardin. 47 years after the murder, the case is still cold. After the murder, Victoria Hardin didn't spend another night in the house. In March 1978, 3 years after the murder, the Ferris family moved into the home. They had no idea it was the site of an unsolved murder. June Ferris, the family's matriarch, was struck with an odd sense of déjà vu when she entered the home for the first time. She recognized it because she had reoccurring dreams about being in the house. In her dreams, June knew that the house had 2 staircases. She would get out of bed and go down the back staircase to the kitchen. She would then go out to the porch. That's when she always woke up. Shortly after moving in, strange things around the house started happening. One night, while everyone was sleeping, June's daughter, Robin, and her husband were awoken by the sound of music in another room. They went to investigate, and they found several music boxes playing. They asked the other people in the house, and no one had turned them on. Another time, June's other daughter, Lori, was watching TV in the house with her boyfriend, Bob. They heard the back door open and close. Then they heard some heavy footsteps heading towards them. But then, no one came into the room. They investigated, but they found no one had come into the home. One day, Robin was walking out the back staircase. She felt a chill go through her body that she compared to the feeling you get when you open the freezer door on a hot day. Then she saw the ghost of a man who was in his 30s. June's grandson also lived in the house. He told his family that he too had seen the ghost of the man. It watched him as he slept. Because of all the strange phenomena, the family believed that the house was haunted. In October 1985, Lori's boyfriend, Bob, did some research on the house. He learned about John Hardin's murder. It made most sense to the family that it was his spirit who was haunting the house. When June learned about the murder, she looked at her reoccurring dreams differently. She realized she followed the same path John did on his way out of the house to be murdered. John's first wife was told that his spirit might be haunting the house. She thought it was possible. She said that John was a protective father that liked checking in on his kids while they were sleeping. She thought that's what the ghost was doing when he watched June's grandson sleep. The Ferris family lived in the house for another 5 years, and then, in 1990, they sold it to Ken and Donna Hatley. Like the Ferris family, they experienced strange and unexplained phenomena. They would hear strange footsteps and other odd sounds when no one was around. It wasn't long after they moved in that Unsolved Mysteries recorded a segment about John's murder and the supposed haunting. the production team also experienced strange things. Their equipment would stop working for no reason. Doors would open on their own, and lights would flicker on and off. Finally, an attic window shattered when no one was around. Donna Hatley said that the strange phenomena stopped about 2 years after they moved in. Many people hoped that this was a sign that even though his murder wasn't solved, John Hardin's spirit was finally able to rest. Number 2. The Mackey Gregory House. In the spring of 1984, 36-year-old graphic artist Karen Gregory moved in with her boyfriend, David Mackey, into his home in Gulfport, Florida. Gregory was a likable and charismatic woman who had many friends. Shortly after moving in, on Monday, May 21st, 1984, Mackey had to go to Rhode Island on business. On Wednesday, he tried to call Gregory twice, but he couldn't get a hold of her. Then on Thursday, Mackey called several times, but again, he got no answer. So he called her work and found out that she didn't show up for work that day or the day before. Mackey called a neighbor and asked her to check on Gregory. The neighbor went over to the home and looked through a window. She saw the body of 36-year-old Karen Gregory lying in a pool of blood in the hallway. The neighbor immediately called the police. The police discovered that the killer probably entered the home through the bedroom window about 31 hours earlier. It's believed that Gregory was stabbed once in the bedroom, and then she tried to run from her killer, but he caught her. He brought her into the hallway, where he killed her. Gregory was partially dressed, so the police believed that she had been sexually assaulted. Nothing was stolen from the house, and it had been raining on the night of the murder, so they didn't think it was a burglary gone wrong. Instead, they believed that the killer broke in intending to assault Gregory sexually. The medical examiner would later confirm she had been raped. She had been stabbed dozens of times, and her throat had been slit. The police surmised that the murder happened sometime around 1:15 a.m. on Wednesday, May 23rd, because about a dozen neighbors heard a woman screaming at that time. However, no one called 911. The police believed that they found one useful clue. It was a bloody, bare footprint. The police quickly eliminated several suspects, including David Mackey. He was in Rhode Island when the murder happened, and there was no evidence he set up the murder. The police also ruled out a friend of Karen Gregory, who Mackey thought had feelings for her. The police quickly eliminated 8 other suspects as well. Unfortunately, it wasn't long before the case went cold. In December 1985, there was a party at the Gulfport City Hall because one of the city managers was leaving. At the party, a city bus driver talked to a police sergeant and mentioned that she lived 3 blocks from Karen Gregory's home. She had heard the scream the night of the murder. The sergeant relayed the information to the detectives on the case. They were surprised that the scream was that loud. They hadn't interviewed people who lived that far from the crime scene. The detectives decided to talk to the only neighbor who was outside when the murder happened. That was 23-year-old George Lewis. He lived kitty corner from Karen Gregory and David Mackey. He was a firefighter and captain of the neighborhood watch. He was also friends with several detectives on the case. Lewis said on the night of the murder he had been in his garage working on his motorcycle and listening to the radio. He initially told the police that he had heard a faint scream. He turned off the radio, left the garage, but didn't hear anything else. The lead detective interviewed him again, and afterward, he thought something about Lewis's statement was odd. Someone who lived a few blocks from the crime scene said that they heard a glass break. It's believed that Gregory, or her killer, broke a window after she ran from the bedroom. But Lewis never said anything about hearing glass breaking. The detective asked Lewis to do a polygraph exam, and he agreed. During the polygraph exam, Lewis had a new version of what happened that night. He said he saw a large man with red hair and a beard on Gregory's property around the same time as the murder. He gave a detailed description of the man, including what he was wearing. Lewis said that he made eye contact with the man and went back inside. Lewis never told anyone about the man because he was worried that the man would come after his wife and their baby. The detective thought that this was an odd thing to say because at the time of the murder, Lewis wasn't married. He got married months later and his wife was just now pregnant. In fact, he was the officiant at the wedding and he married the two in a fire truck bucket. Also, the detective thought it was strange that Lewis would give such a detailed description of the killer. When Gregory was murdered, it was dark and raining. How did Lewis get such a good look at the man from across the road? So, the detectives on the case decided to do a test. On a clear night, they had Lewis tell them where he saw the man, and then they had him stand in his garage. Then they had a detective that Lewis personally knew for several years stand in the place where he claimed he saw the man. Then they asked Lewis to describe him, and he couldn't. He couldn't even identify that it was someone he had known for years. After the test, the lead detective would stop by Lewis's home and discuss the case. Each time, Lewis had some new version of events about the night of the murder. In March 1985, Lewis sat down for another polygraph exam. This time, he told the examiner that he had walked over to Gregory's yard and he was about 3 feet from the man. He claimed that he talked to the man in the yard. The man had told him to get lost. It turned out that Lewis failed the polygraph exam. The detectives thought that his story started to make less sense. Why would the killer stand outside of Gregory's house after the murder? Why didn't he just leave? Why wouldn't he have killed Lewis, who was now a witness? George Lewis was now their number one suspect. In all Lewis's stories, he maintained that he was never inside Gregory's home, and the police couldn't place him inside the house. So they collected his handprints and footprints, along with head, chest, and pubic hair samples. In early 1986, the lead detective sent the bloody footprint and a copy of Lewis's footprint to the FBI. On March 11th, he got the results. It was George Lewis's footprint. 30 points of comparison were found. The analyst thought he could find more if they needed, but he was sure it was Lewis's footprint. On March 15, 1986, nearly 2 years after Karen Gregory's murder, 24-year-old George Lewis was charged with her murder. Lewis went to trial in June 1987 and it lasted about 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for 13 hours over 2 days. He was found guilty on all charges. He could have been given the death penalty, but instead, he was sentenced to life in prison. Lewis has always denied committing the murder. He appealed several times, but he was denied each time. George Lewis died in 2015 in prison at the age of 52 from natural causes. Karen Gregory's boyfriend, David Mackey, was distraught after her murder and he couldn't stay in the house where she was killed. He sold it a few months after the murder. 10 years after the murder, in 1994, a woman named Stephanie Berlotti purchased the house. She knew that Karen Gregory had been murdered in the house, but that didn't bother her. She moved into the house on Halloween 1994. It wasn't long before she noticed strange things happening in the house. A brown stain would appear on the floor in the hallway where Gregory was murdered, where her body laid for 31 hours. The stain would go away if she scrubbed it, but it would always reappear. So she just placed a Persian rug over it. Whenever she tries to open the bedroom window, the one is believed the killer entered, the glass shatters. One time when she was in the bathroom, she saw a misty image of a woman's face in the mirror. When her mother was visiting, she heard footsteps of someone running through the house. When Berlotti heard this, she couldn't help but think of Gregory running through the house, trying to escape her killer. Even her pets were affected. They would spend hours staring at the bedroom wall, as if they were looking at something. Berlotti said she doesn't mind sharing her house with Gregory's ghost. In fact, she thinks the ghost saved her life. One night there was a fire in the kitchen, and suddenly something woke her up. She was able to put the fire out before it got out of hand. Berlotti said she asked Gregory for advice when decorating her home. Number 1. The Barcy House. Judith Barcy was born in Los Angeles, California on June 6, 1978. Her parents, Joe and Maria Barcy, were both immigrants from Hungary. They met at a restaurant where Maria worked as a waitress and Joe, a plumbing contractor, often dined. When Judith was 5 years old, she was skating at an ice rink. A film crew was there filming a commercial. Something about Judith caught their attention, and she was cast in the commercial. This was the start of her acting career. She would go on to appear in 72 other commercials. She also landed several TV roles. Her first role was in the true crime miniseries Fatal Vision, which was broadcast in November 1984. Fatal Vision is based on the controversial true crime book of the same name. Fatal Vision details the complex murder case of the MacDonald family. In February 1970, Jeffrey MacDonald was an Army captain and physician. He lived with his 25-year-old pregnant wife, Colette, and their 2 daughters, 5-year-old Kristen and 2-year-old Kimberly, at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Early on the morning of February 17, 1970, Colette, Kristen, and Kimberly were brutally murdered. Jeffrey was at home at the time of the murders and he was injured, but not too badly. He claims that a group of 4 hippies, 3 men and 1 woman, broke in and attacked them. But in August 1979, 9 years after the murders, Jeffrey was convicted of them and sentenced to life in prison. Over 50 years after the murders, it's still highly debated if Jeffrey was the killer or not. Judith's role in Fatal Vision was Kimberly, one of the murdered daughters. Judith's success continued with roles in television series and made-for-TV movies. In 1985, Judith was 7 and she was making over $100,000 a year, which is about $275,000 in 2022. That year, with Judith's money, her parents bought a beautiful 3-bedroom ranch house in the Canoga Park area of Los Angeles. Sadly, life inside the house was hellish. Joe had a violent temper and ghoulish thoughts. It seemed like he hated his wife, Maria, and he thought she paid too much attention to Judith. He told several friends that he wanted to kill Maria. Or he wanted to kill Judith, then take his own life and leave Maria alive so she'd have to deal with the loss of her precious daughter. Joe was also abusive and cruel to his wife and daughter. Joe liked to invite people over to the home and then point out how awful Maria was at cleaning the house. On one occasion, he dragged Judith around the house by her hair. Their neighbor found one encounter with Joe disturbing. Judith was flying a kite she had purchased with money from her acting. Judith was upset and told him not to touch it because he would break it. Joe turned to the neighbor and told him that Judith was a spoiled brat who couldn't share her toys. Joe then proceeded to break the kite into several pieces. In the summer of 1986, Maria finally had enough and filed a police report. In the report, she claimed that Joe had been physically, emotionally, and psychologically abusive for 5 years. The police investigated, but they didn't find any evidence to charge Joe with anything. Judith continued to get work on several popular television shows. This included Remington Steele, Punky Brewster, The Love Boat, St. Elsewhere, and Cheers. Judith was small for her age, so she often got roles where she played children younger than she actually was. Unfortunately, while Judith's career was going well, things at home worsened. She told people her father was drunk daily and her mother was suicidal. In early 1987, Judith landed a role in Jaws: The Revenge, the fourth movie in the Jaws franchise. She and Maria were going to the Bahamas to shoot the movie. Before they left for the Bahamas, Joe held up a knife and told Judith she better come back home or he would slit her throat. Maria and Judith returned home after filming had wrapped. Before going to the Bahamas, Judith was mentally unwell. After they returned home, her mental health continued in a downward spiral. She started pulling out her eyelashes and her cat's whiskers. In May 1988, Judith was supposed to audition for an animated movie, but she started to sob uncontrollably and couldn't be consoled. That's when Judith's agent realized Judith was having some serious mental problems. She suggested that Maria take Judith to a child psychologist. Maria followed the advice, and in turn, the psychologist reported the situation to Children's Services. Children's Services probably should have stepped in, but they talked to Maria. Maria assured them that she was leaving Joe. So, they did nothing. Maria did end up renting an apartment. During the day, she and Judith would live there, but at night, they returned to the home in Canoga Park with Joe. Judith got the biggest roles of her career when she was cast to voice characters in 2 anime movies that were to be directed by Don Bluth, and they were being produced by Steven Spielberg's production company. Those roles were Ducky in The Land Before Time and Anne-Marie in All Dogs Go to Heaven. By the summer of 1988, Judith had finished recording her lines for both films. On July 25, 1988, Judith had an appointment at Hanna-Barbera Productions, Inc. But she didn't show up and her mother didn't call. Later that morning, Judith's agent called the family's home and Joe answered. He told her that Judith and Maria got into a big car and went to San Diego, California. 2 days went by and no one saw the family. Then, on the morning of July 27th, around 8:30 a.m., a neighbor heard what sounded like a gunshot coming from the Barcy's garage. Minutes later, someone noticed that the family's home was on fire. The heat from the house was so intense that it blew out the windows. The fire department was able to put the fire out. They made a gruesome discovery inside, and the police were notified. Based on the evidence, the police believe they know what happened. 2 days earlier, when Judith and Maria were expected at Hanna-Barbera, Joe went into the bedroom of 10-year-old Judith. He shot her once in the head while she was in bed. Maria probably heard the gunshot and went to investigate the sound. She came across Joe in the hallway. 48-year-old Maria was also shot once in the head. Her body was found in the hallway. 2 days after murdering his wife and daughter, 50-year-old Joe poured an accelerant around the house then started the fire. He then went into the garage and shot himself. The Land Before Time was released 4 months after the senseless murders. It was a box office hit, and Judith's character, Ducky, was a fan favorite. The Land Before Time spawned a dozen direct-to-video sequels. Judith's last role, Old Dogs Go to Heaven, was released a year after her murder in November 1989. The movie's theme song, Love Survives by Freddie Jackson and Irene Cara, which plays over the ending credits, is dedicated to Judith Barcy. While Judith's acting career left a legacy behind, it is not the only part of her that possibly remains here on Earth. According to the family who moved into their house in the early 2000s, the house was haunted. The Bernal family said they were not aware of the home's dark history when they bought the house. They said they have experienced strange phenomena since moving into the house. Patriarch Francisco Bernal said they felt bad energy when they moved in. His daughter, Gabby, was 10 when they moved in, the same age Judith was when she was murdered. Gabby said that shortly after moving in, she had an imaginary friend named Joseph. He would make the garage door open and close. The family also felt unexplained cold spots throughout the house. Gabby, who slept in the same room where Judith was murdered, claimed she had terrible nightmares. Other times she wouldn't be able to sleep, and it felt like someone was watching her. In order to sleep, she hung up a dozen dream catchers. Sometimes, while walking down the hallway where Maria was murdered, the family said it felt like someone was walking behind them. Other times they would hear footsteps in the hallway when no one was there. The Bernal family appeared in the first season of the reality show Murder House Flip. The show's designers focused on the hallway, Judith's former bedroom, and the backyard. After the redesign, the Bernal family said it felt like the negative energy had dissipated. Hopefully Judith and Marie can finally rest in peace after such a tumultuous family life.